And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In last month's press release, the Lax Kw'alaams Band stated the proposed Kitsillas and Pictou First Nations treaties had the potential to negatively and irreparably impact and infringe Lax Kw'alaams' rights, title, interests, and self-determination within their territory. On today's Open Connection, Lax Kw'alaams Mayor Gary Reese and Allied Tsimshian Tribes Association Stan Dennis Jr.
I want to go back to the Tsimshian Tribal Council days there. And when I first got in as a councillor, I attended just about every meeting when that tribal council was formed for them to negotiate treaty. And we had all our elders, our hereditary leaders, all from 7 communities, all involved when they drew those maps on the boundaries. And that was put out to Canada, the province, and the BC Treaty Commission, and was accepted. We had no problems with any other First Nation that was claiming overlap in there. Everyone was okay with those maps that went out, and today we still have those maps. That's what we go by. We haven't changed that, and we're sticking to that. And today, that's why I say we still haven't changed from what was put out from our hereditary people and our elders.
Just recently, there was an initialing of a treaty negotiation between over at CFTK-TV and then over at Kitsillas too, or Kitsillassu. What is Lax Kw'alaams' response to that initially?
Well, it's kind of strange that I find that them initial off there. We've been in reconciliation, negotiating with the province and the federal government, and we've completed phase 1 lands through that process, and we're about to go into the second phase of that, and then we get word that they're not going to be at the table until after the election, because the election is happening. So what is the difference with them signing off the initial off the treaties with these 2 bands, and they tell us that? I find that quite disturbing when they tell us that and they go ahead and do this with these other 2 First Nations.
We've been working from the tribe side there with the Lax Kw'alaams Band in regards to raising these issues and bringing our concerns forward. And I agree with Mayor Reese there. We found it really upsetting that the province and the federal government would go through with initializing the both communities' treaty process there when we haven't even had a response in regards to bringing our, I hate to use the word overlap issues, because we never ever initiated any of our boundaries as overlaps amongst each others within the tribes to CFTK-TV or Kitsillas. What we submit there in our maps is that we have a history to all of that, and it's pretty upsetting to see that they went through the process of initializing the documents with both communities when we weren't even properly consulted at all as allied tribes. So not happy with that process. It puts more of a wedge between our neighbors than anything else. And so then moving forward, that's our standpoint on how we saw things going on from the tribes, along with the Lax Kw'alaams Band.
We don't have a problem with these other Tsimshian communities when they're negotiating their treaty. You know, we support that. But when they claim into our territory, you know, that's when we have really huge concerns over that.
People watching may or may not know the dynamics involved when it comes to the Tsimshian people and the territory they have. Could you kind of lay out for me, the different nations or the bands, that are part of that group?
Well, within all the Tsimshian, there are seven communities amongst all of us. Starting from Lax Kw'alaams, we have Metakatla, Kitkatla, Hartley Bay, or Gitgat, and Pictou on the coast. And then inland, you have CFTK-TV and Kitsalas. So there's seven communities that comprise, like Mayor Reese had alluded to in regards to the Tsimshian Tribal Council days, that basically at that time coincided with one another, establishing a working group to map out our process in terms of treaty and establish where the boundaries are. And again, that was agreed upon in those days. And now, why has that changed, and why is the government allow that to happen without even consulting with us? So that's a little bit in regards to who's all involved with this process here when the Tsimshian Tribal Council days were up and running. And so that's part and parcel where we submitted our maps, and which started in late 70s when the hereditary and historians got together and started putting the stories to our territories in regards to establishing where the boundaries are for each tribe. And so that's how that came about. And when we submitted that, it hasn't changed. And the only changes that I can say that have happened is pertaining to stories within an individual tribe, as an example, where their boundaries are. And so, but that doesn't diminish what was put on in terms of each individual tribe's boundaries on those maps.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. A treaty is a negotiated agreement that sets out clearly defined rights and responsibilities of First Nations and the federal and provincial governments. It is also a full and formal expression of reconciliation between First Nations and the government. Let us return to the conversation as Mayor Reef shares how the Tsimshian elders and hereditary chiefs help guide him in the hereditary process.
Well, that's why I said, it was our elders and the hereditary chiefs that put those boundaries on a map where through the Tsimshian Tribal Council, and it was all accepted. And the government accepted it, both levels of government and the BC Treaty Commission. And during those days also, when we were involved with the Tsimshian Tribal Council and we're up and going, any First Nation that came into our territory to go get food fish, they had to get a food permit through that there, and that they had to get permission. And we haven't changed from that with our territory. Any First Nation that's going to come into our territory, they have to get permission to do that. They can't just come and say, well, and our people going back a number of years allowed other First Nation Tsimshian communities to come into our territory to fish. They were only given permission to do that. It wasn't that they gave them authority that they can come in and say it's theirs. And that has happened. They think, that they can come and claim into our area, but they only had permission to do that.
I guess you could almost say there could be a blurred line, because fishing that had involved, when the canneries had set up along the coast down near Port Edward and Port Essington, because that was part of the area that was designated as part of this initialing of the treaty.
That belongs to the Gitsis tribe there. And I can add to that a little bit, Robert, in regards to Pictou. That's what the name is for Port Essington. And at that time, there was plenty of resources for the the name that my father wears is Spinahonk, and that's his tribal territory. So at that time, the Spinahonk of the day gave permission because there was so much fish that he allowed before the cannery was built, permission for those not within the tribe to have access to, because it's so plentiful at that time. And then, the government, without consent to the Spinahonk of the day, turned that into a reserve and gave it over to Kitsim, I believe it was. And nobody knew about that until long after.
When Stan mentioned the 7 communities, Metakatla is the same as us. They belong to the 9 allied tribes, and it was a government that divided that and separated and gave them reserves, and that they belong to the 9 allied tribes.
What do we need to do, or what needs to be done to correct this if this process is going to need to go forward?
They have to sit with us, and we need to come to an agreement with them, and so we can move forward. And right now, that we're waiting for that to happen.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. According to the BC government website, to begin the treaty process, a First Nation files a statement of intent with the BC Treaty Commission to negotiate a treaty with BC and Canada. The BCTE then coordinates a treaty table consisting of negotiators represented by the First Nation, the province, and the federal government. Let us return the conversation with Stan Dennis Jr.
In my view there, the government created this mess on both levels, and they have to be a part of this, of trying to reconcile with us in regards to our boundaries. And I want to allude a little bit to that, what was mentioned earlier. We've always had markers, whether it be pictographs and all that stuff there, or markings within our territories that belong to a specific house or chief. Nothing has changed except in how we live now. And I'll use our signage we raised along the Skeena there pertaining to each individual tribe. So that hasn't changed. It just was a remarking of the territory, but it's just in the same place, except the difference is we're using today's all that. So, and that was an educational process that we wanted to let guests that are coming into the territory know whose territory it belongs to, and educating them to be respectful and whatnot to our territories. And that's where that stemmed from. So I say again, this marking of the territory hasn't changed for us. It's just the process that has changed in regards to what we use. Back in the days, they used paintings or boulders or what have you, and they had those then. Now we use signage. So that's all that where that stems from. And I thought I'd point that out.
Because there's an area, if I'm heading from Terrace to Prince Rupert, you follow the Skeena for quite some time. And then just before you kind of get away from the river, you kind of go up a little bit. And then over on the rock face, there seems to be a painting on the face of the wall. Is that kind of like what you're talking about?
That's Legaich's paintings there. There's also Legaich. He's the chief of the Gisbet tribe back in the day, where he had his markings there, and that's one of them. And the other one's up in Terrace along the Skeena there, called Devil's Gate. He has his paintings there as well. It belongs to Legaich, because that was his route when we had the Grease Trail.
And I guess it brings up another thought when it comes to these boundaries. And it's not just this initialing that kind of started this off. If we go back a little bit, there is an area that's up in the Nass that is kind of in dispute too. Is that correct?
That's up in the Sugar Gulf. And as Stan mentioned that, there's pictographs also up there that was done by the chiefs of the day. We ended up having to go to court over in the Sugar Gulf there, as the government agreed to sell it off to the Niska, which is our territory, and so we had to take that to court. And if you read the court ruling on that, we have a really strong case for that there, and that it's well documented with our people with that area. And we got that court injunction on the first round and was appealed, and now it's going to end up going to the Supreme Court of Canada, because the second go around, the two judges weren't comfortable because this consultation was not completed. That's the only reason that it went that way, is that they're saying it wasn't completed. So, but we totally disagree. We're going to the Supreme Court of Canada for that. We haven't got heard back when it was accepted, but that's what we're doing. And there's still, they moved over to Pierce Island, which is already in our territory again. And, we're disputing that also.
This seems to be almost like an ongoing pattern where it's kind of hit and miss on when this treaty process that they're actually consulting all the bands. Would that be right?
I think, a lot of change over when, going back to the Simpson Travel Council days, so I said when everybody agreed, okay, I had a court case that happened where they had to consult and accommodate. Okay, if you look what's going on in the Rupert area, where everything's happening around there, LNG was going to happen, and that's when some of these First Nations started claiming into our territory, because everything was happening in our territory there in Rupert.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In 2015, the BC government and Petronas offered the Lax Kw'alaams $1.2 billion in cash and land to support the Pacific Northwest LNG project. Lax Kw'alaams was extremely concerned about the environmental risk of the project, particularly how it would impact the flora banks on Lilu Island. In this final segment of Open Connection, Mayor Reef shares how the Lax Kw'alaams came upon that decision.
No, it was an easy decision for our people, because if they had destroyed that flora bank at that time, if that ever happened there, then we would have no more salmon in the Skeena. And that was so dear to our people, and that's why that was shot down at that time.
And I guess you say, Stan, is this kind of like along the same lines? It's like when they initial these treaties, they're kind of doing the same thing. They're not really looking at the big picture?
Well, they're not considering our concerns being brought forward, that's for sure. One of the challenges is that, as you heard Mayor Reese talk about, is that in the Tsimshian Tribal Council days, we used to have a lot of get-togethers in regards to Lax Kw'alaams meeting with the other 6 communities and bringing a lot of our stories and histories together in regards to our territories. And now that has changed, because it's one individual community bringing what they have to both levels of government, in the federal and provincial levels, and not even considering what we have in terms of our Adel, the stories behind our territories. And I want to highlight this here because within our territories, the names that we wear as allied tribes, Tsimshian, our Tsimshian names, come from our territories. And with that is the story behind the name that we wear. and our traditional names. And if that is not understood by, because we know for a fact, as you heard Mayor Reese talk about the court cases, they are well aware of our history and the names that go within our territory. I don't think they can deny that. So it's a matter of, a wedge. That's the only word that I can come up with that they're putting in between us and our neighbors. And it's not good. The outcome's not going to be good, because I will say this, we as tribes will fight for, like our ancestors did, for our territory. And we're not at liberty to give anything up. And we don't mind, as you heard, what is going on in terms of treaty and having them have self-determination. That's okay, but as long as it doesn't overtake our territories. Because I say again, if anything is lost in our regards, our names and our history, and then that's what they're trying to do. And we're pushed into a corner where we have to stand up and fight. And this is where we're almost at. By them initiating the treaty process with our upriver neighbors, it's not a good thing. Just in terms of the territories and us working with the Lax Kw'alaams band, one of the things of discussions that we've had, and this is just at the local level, is when it comes down to it, if they're initializing some of are they aware that there has to be a consultation process that has to be in place? And from my standpoint, what are they going to do with the Lax Kw'alaams band and Lax Kw'alaams allied tribes? Because from the Lax Kw'alaams band standpoint, we have a huge number of reserves that go all the way up there along our territories. And from the tribal perspective is, I say again, we have our adel, our stories behind our territories, each individual territory. Where does that go with them? Because it belongs to us. Those stories belong to us. When it comes to names, place names, and everything else, and the resources within it. So, as somewhere along the line, if heaven forbid for us that this goes through, how do they propose to compensate us? Is that even a part of their discussion? And there's no amount of money, in my view, that will take care of us losing our territories.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.